The Tyreek Hill blockbuster. That's what we're going to talk about today on Stealing Bananas. This is our first ever live Stealing Bananas. We decided we had to get Shawn, who went full out in the Chiefs gear, live for his reaction. I'm Ben Gretch. Find my Substack at bengretch.substack.com. With me, as always, is Shawn Siegele. Find all of his great work at RotoViz. Shawn, we were inevitably just going to riff back and forth this whole episode once we found out this news this morning. So we figured we might as well do it live, let people who might have some comments or some thoughts jump in. What is your initial big picture reaction from the Chiefs' perspective? They obviously get a haul. We just saw the actual trade. I mean, we didn't know if when we went live we'd have the details. It sounds like it's the number 29 pick, a late second. I think it was 60. And then a fourth and a sixth and a future fourth or something. Some day three picks I think were thrown in. The one first is obviously the blue chip pick at 29. I know the immediate speculation was maybe they'd get a top 10 pick. You know, the Jets and Dolphins both have a lot of draft capital in the earlier part. And actually, before I go straight to you, RotoViz is trying to grow this YouTube channel. So subscribe, like, do all those things to the video. But Shawn, what was your initial reaction on the return, on the lack of Tyreek? What was your first biggest reaction when hearing this news?
Well, I mean, he must have used his second half performance from the AFC Championship game and really circulated that tape and got all these teams involved for the trade here and just they got Juju Smith-Schuster, and you're thinking they've addressed that third receiver position. They're going to go out and win a bunch of championships, and now we lose Tyreek Hill. I think the Chiefs fans had to be hoping for the Jets picks, right, because they have that really early option, and you can get back in there and get a Garrett Wilson. You could get a Treylon Burks. Now, you look at the different mock drafts, and you look at what Burks did in the combine, and you're thinking, I mean, some people think that at least one of these elite receivers will fall. It now feels inevitable that the Chiefs will use one of those two picks there that they have at the end of the first round to draft a receiver. I guess, I mean, little things here that pop up. I'm elated that Demarcus Robinson and Byron Pringle have already signed elsewhere because I think that the Chiefs, and anytime you have this kind of situation, you fall back on familiarity, but we know that those two guys are not going to move the needle, can't get anything done for Kansas City. You think back to Patrick Mahomes' very first game where he's playing basically with the backups because they've got those guys in to rest them for the playoffs. He absolutely dominates. I mean, this offense is Patrick Mahomes, right? And I don't think that Tyreek Hill is Devante Adams. And so I don't think that you're losing that, but you're losing a guy with 4.2 speed. And then we think about those big plays in the Buffalo game. If you don't have a guy who can run like the wind, I mean, those are very different drives, very different plays. And you lose someone that there's not really anybody like in the NFL. You keep going back to it, and that Tyreek Hill has speed that matters and is difference making at the NFL level where so many of these guys have blazing speed. To be at yet another level and to lose that, there's just nobody like it.
I mean, that was the immediate reaction all throughout Twitter. All of the sort of sharpest, real football analysts were, what he does for their scheme, how he tilts the field, what he provides in terms of, I think I saw a couple different people say in terms of non-quarterbacks, he might be the most important player to a team in the entire NFL. No longer on the Chiefs. I saw some comments about sort of Patrick Mahomes' legacy. Maybe he's already played with the best teams he'll ever play with. It's hard to figure that they will wind up in a better spot. I do want to talk about some ways that Kansas City could go. Quick Will Fuller tease, because I just am salivating over here about the idea that Will Fuller could potentially wind up in Kansas City. Still a free agent. We've thought all offseason he's probably tied to Deshaun Watson, and so obviously Cleveland makes a ton of sense. But this possibility now with Tyreek Hill gone of filling this speed role as a guy who's not only a speed player, but can also do things in the shorter and intermediate ranges that Tyreek obviously increasingly had to do these last couple of years as they faced more too high safety looks and all of those things. Will Fuller just feels like I'm looking at this future Chiefs wide receiver group of now Juju as this still high upside potential reclamation project, and Will Fuller, same deal. I mean, every comment on Twitter when I tweeted out all I could think about was Will Fuller to KC was for the 1.5 games he's healthy, it will be amazing. But if these guys could stay healthy and you add in the rookie that obviously we all expect now they're going to take one of these rookies, and there are 5 or 6 that are potentially worth first round picks. We've talked about on the show, obviously, the ones that are coming off injury that could potentially be pushed down a little bit to where that might make them an option for Kansas City. I'm not sure where Jameson Williams is being mocked, but even like the George Pickens types I've seen as a late first round pick might wind up being a really interesting pick for Kansas City. That trio of like a Fuller and a Juju, if those guys can, perform better in the Kansas City offense than they have over the last couple of years, or stay healthier, or however you want to view that, I mean, there's still past they could go. But I'm getting ahead of myself because we have to emphasize the Tyreek loss. Like, what does this mean for Mahomes? What is it like? It's sort of hard to overstate how big of an impact. To your point, their number 3 receivers behind Hill and Travis Kelce have never really done anything. And even as Hill and Kelce have commanded as much attention as any top 2 receivers in the league because of Hill's speed, because of what Kelce can do. And those guys still can't earn targets. None of them have strong targets per run rates. None of them are doing anything that is, even optimistic. They are gone now. I think you're absolutely right. I thought that was a great point that that's sort of a good thing. But no Tyreek Hill is going to completely change the shape of this offense.
And it's for both the good and the bad, right? Because again, no one takes the top off like Hill. You think about the big plays that he's made in some of the previous seasons. When those were absent in the first half of the year this year, the Chiefs offense really did stutter. And we saw this first time period where everybody is thinking, okay, well, Patrick Mahomes actually is mortal. I mean, he's mortal, but he's still the best of the best. The best teams he's played on are not behind him. The Kansas City Chiefs are going to be in the mix. They're going to win Super Bowls. I think the offense could potentially be better. You mentioned that none of the guys behind him can draw targets, and that's absolutely crucial. They cannot. I was putting together a Juju article, a little bit like the J.D. McKissick article that I had almost ready to go. That Juju article is not going to have to be massively rewritten. But it's interesting when you look at the efficiency numbers for the guys behind the big 2, they're absolutely phenomenal. And again, I mean, that's when you're actually open and you're playing off of the other 2 players, then Patrick Mahomes is going to hit you and you're going to gain the yards that type of play will indicate. So the efficiency can be there. But so now the question is, who does draw the targets, who plays off of whom, and how will this all work? Now, one of the things I think that you could see happen is they build a more well-rounded offense that's more difficult to defend because the Chiefs have even more things they could do. Now, we had kind of teased something that'd be really fun would be for the Chiefs to go out there and make that move for Christian McCaffrey. That was always just a complete pipe dream on my part. But we knew that someone like a Saquon Barkley has been tossed around as available for not very much. I mean, it would be incredibly awesome to see the Chiefs do that. But it's also possible that they could add multiple receivers, right? I mean, you're not limited to what you can do. Now, the Chiefs do have some other needs. They've got some things in the secondary they have to address. They're always looking to make their lines more dominant so that they can be this team that is more than just Patrick Mahomes. We know that they're looking to build in all of those areas. But you could add a couple of rookie wide receivers. You mentioned Pickens. There's a Justin Ross who's kind of interesting. We know that Sky Moore is generating an incredible amount of buzz as a potential second rounder. So you could add a top guy. You could add a second guy. You have Juju there. Potentially you have Fuller. I would like to see them build this team that doesn't need a Tyreek Hill, but just has weapons all over the place. And I think that path now is possible, and it's exciting. Now, it doesn't mean that it'll play out that way for sure, but you think about Hardman. We know that he doesn't run the routes particularly well. He's not going to draw the targets down the field, but they can replace some of the underneath things that Hill did last year. And they used him very heavily underneath in a way that was kind of frustrating, but necessary with the way defenses were playing them. If they replace some of that with Hardman and then they bring in these rookie guys, they have Juju, who is going to be a huge impact player in the middle of the field for them, and then stretch deep on both sides. There are a lot of ways that they could attack this. And one of the things that both the Chiefs and the Packers have done is say, look, if we have to pay you guys like you were out there on the free agent market, then by the time that your contract is signed and you've signed for this incredible amount of money, then your trade value is essentially zero, right? Because you're going to the highest bidder. Now, in both of those situations, the teams had some control over what was going on. So it's not going to be a pure highest bidder type of situation, but they're going to sign huge contracts. And to get a lot back in terms of things they can use to now address needs and have that money back, because they're not going to have to pay it to them, then you can also, again, address other needs. And so you can build a deeper team, a better team. I think it's exciting in a way if you can get past the fact that, you don't have Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, it's the inverse of the Frank Clark trade in that way, where instead of giving up a ton of assets and then signing the player, maybe they learned their lesson and they're trying to do it the opposite way. But now you're trading away Tyreek Hill, which is like it's challenging. I've seen some people essentially say it's a bad trade for everyone. I don't think it's great for Miami to be giving up a ton and then signing him to a massive deal. We kind of hinted the same about the Devante Adams deal. It's not a bad move to add Tyreek Hill to your offense, but there's going to be some real concerns there. We'll get to Miami, I think, later. We got to focus on the Chiefs first. But I love the comment about the Christian McCaffrey thing. I hadn't thought about that yet, but I mean, you have mentioned that this offseason. If that somehow were to happen, it would be really interesting because he actually, as a running back, brings things to the passing game. Don't know how to continue to emphasize that, but he's incredibly good in all the kind of advanced metrics in terms of earning target volume and things. He would add value in the passing game. But the most important thing that you just said there was that there could be a way that this could make the Chiefs better, which I don't know what stage of the bargaining or coping, whatever, the 7 stages of grief. I don't know where we're at right now, but you have already we're about 12 minutes into this. You've already gotten to where the Chiefs could be better without Tyreek Hill. It does make me think, though, is some of this related to their struggles once teams started going so heavily too high against them and how Mahomes had to try to play quarterback differently, and they started to use Tyreek more underneath as well, sort of similar to how you're just describing Mecole. They haven't gotten the same type of deep efficiency and production and explosive play rate out of the Mahomes-Tyreek connection over the last however many, what is it, a year and a half since they've really been hit with those looks. Was this in any way a football move? I've been trying to wrap my head around this all morning. And initially I was like, this is crazy. He's such a huge part of their offense. But the more I think about the way their offense has evolved, maybe there's a part of them that thinks this is the next step they have to take to evolve their offense. Travis Kelce is getting older as well. They need to build Mahomes more weapons. We talk on the show all the time about how the best passing games in the modern NFL are the ones that tend to have the third, fourth targets that are still good, that have multiple places to go with the ball. The Chiefs have been so reliant on 2 guys for so long. I don't think it's that crazy that you said that they could wind up better if they are able to get 3 or 4 strong options. They obviously have to be still good, but Mahomes is going to add to that efficiency like you talked about. He's going to make his players better, his receivers better. I mean, I can't wrap my head around it. I can't wrap my head around Tyreek Hill not being a Chief right yet, but the idea that him not being there might actually influence the way defenses play them and might actually lead them to having more targets, more viable receiving weapons at different depths, and allow Mahomes to then progress into being a different type of quarterback. And this team has to be built around Mahomes for the next decade. Maybe it is right. Maybe it's the smart football move at this point if they're able to address things. I'm sitting here already counting Will Fuller in, but the initial thought was Marquez Valdes-Scantling. That's a completely different player. He's good, but that's a completely different deep threat than Will Fuller in my eyes in terms of overall upside of the player. Maybe they don't hit on the right receiver. We saw them take Clyde Edwards-Helaire over Jonathan Taylor. I know you've talked about that every day since then. What if they had Jonathan Taylor right now? This would be a lot different of a conversation as well with them moving on from Hill. He would at least provide another element to their offense. But yeah, they have to get playmakers in there now. They obviously don't. They basically have Kelce and what we're hoping Juju could be in this offense. But Juju's contract, not huge. A lot of people are a little overreacting to Juju now as the wide receiver 1. I mean, they're not replacing Tyreek to make Juju a superstar. I don't think they need to address this in terms of a 3 or 4 person, more stable receiving group than what they've had in the past with just Hill and Kelsey and 2 main guys.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, those are great points in terms of what the Chiefs can now do tactically from a reality perspective if they execute. And it always comes back to that. I mean, one of the big arguments I was making to you and encouraging you to see this Russell Wilson trade is actually fantastic for the Seahawks, is that they have a lot of paths to, in the end, build a better team, and in 5 years have a much better team. But you have to execute. And I think that as a fan, you have both the excitement and the optimism and also that stress and the worry. You mentioned Clyde Edwards-Helaire. It's also the case that Deontay Johnson and DK Metcalf went after Mecole Hardman in that particular draft. Now, there were actually a lot of other bad receivers that went in between those two. So, I mean, there were other people who could have been even worse picks for the Chiefs there. One of the reasons why you hope they address it a little bit earlier in this draft, and you hope that they don't miss, because you can obviously miss. But you think about this, if this were a fantasy dynasty trade, the Chiefs would be considered the winners, right? Because you're rebuilding, you're reloading, you're getting multiple assets, you have more paths now to be good. And I think that sometimes we lose track of that from a fan perspective with our own teams. I mean, I remember an interaction I had with a big reporter, I don't know, obviously more than a decade ago now, about Larry Johnson with the Chiefs and how if the Chiefs extended him, it would be a disaster. And his argument was, you know, Larry Johnson is the top running back in football right now in this Dick Vermeil offense. Obviously, they've got to pay him and keep him. Well, I mean, it was a very short time later that they regretted that in a major way. I'm not saying that would be the case with Tyreek Hill. If you can keep Tyreek Hill from age 28 to age 33, you're probably getting, again, sort of Hall of Fame type performance in at least a portion of that. But I think that, again, there are paths from a dynasty perspective. When you make these trades, you're not necessarily getting the tactical advantages that a real football team might get that you outlined there. And I think that a little bit of it does stem back to real football. Now, everybody makes mistakes. And when I say that you can pick out some individual mistakes that Tyreek Hill has made, that's not to say that, he's not a good football player, or it's his fault that they lost certain things. But you think back to the second half of the game against the Bengals. The Chiefs offense obviously struggled in part because anytime a team does figure out how to take away Hill and Kelsey, the Chiefs don't move the ball. Now you can say, well, that's the case with any NFL team. You take away their best players, they're not going to move the ball. Very few teams have even a Hill and Kelsey. That's already, there's sort of this embarrassment of riches. But the gap between where those guys are and where everybody else is on the Chiefs is just so massive. Their running backs are so poor. We talk about how running back doesn't matter. And yet if you're going to be forced to use the running backs occasionally and they give you such terrible production, all of those things hurt and they do bog down your offense, right? And then you look at some specific plays. One of the things that I had mentioned to you, and you went back and looked and I think agreed with me, that play in overtime, we'd be looking at all of this differently if Tyreek Hill rises up and catches that ball from Mahomes as opposed to letting it be batted away for an interception. Now, maybe that happens to most wide receivers, but there are guys out there who go up there and make the play on the ball. The Chiefs get the first down, they go and score, they win the Super Bowl, and we're talking about 2 Super Bowls in 3 years. If he makes that catch, I don't think we're necessarily in this position now, although maybe we are. You look back to last year's Super Bowl, the game gets away from the Chiefs, but there's a play early that if Hill goes up and makes the catch on a ball that's there, again, a difficult catch. Not everybody's going to make it, but if he makes
hit him in the
catch,
face mask. Yeah.
So, I mean, there are plays out there that other top 10 receivers will make that Hill doesn't necessarily make. So different strengths and weaknesses from different guys. And we could look at this as, okay, if he makes a couple of these plays, the Chiefs are looking at themselves as 3-time Super Bowl champions. Again, many other things could have happened. We know the Chiefs weren't blocking well in that game, but that's, again, goes back to this element of make your team as strong as it is overall. If you have a strong and deep team with Patrick Mahomes as your QB, you're going to be a number 1 or number 2 seed almost every season. You're going to be in the AFC Championship game more often than not. And we know that if you want to win a Super Bowl, the idea is to get into that range as often as possible. Now, the Patriots probably a little bit fortunate that they executed as many times as they did, but the reason that you win is that you get there over and over and over. You put yourself in that situation. The Rams, obviously, a couple of years ago, get there and lose. They go back and they win. The 49ers are trying to put themselves in that situation where they get there consistently. You want to have a good team, and I think this, I say this, and then the Chiefs draft a couple of bad players, and all of a sudden, you've got nothing, and the Miami Dolphins have Tyreek Hill, right? But this gives you a chance to have more depth, to address more areas, and to build a super team. Maybe it lowers their floor, but this actually raises their ceiling. I mean, they have a chance to be an absolute juggernaut now as a result of this trade.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you mentioned a few key Tyreek Hill moments in playoffs in years past. I don't know how much we talked about on the show. I know you and I have talked a lot about it off the air. You mentioned the play against the Bengals in overtime, I believe, that set up the game-winning field goal. That was the deflected interception. And I felt like when you brought it up to me, I'm not sure if you brought it up on the show or after the show, but I felt like when you brought it to me, you're kind of being probably a little bit of a homer. And we had this email exchange later because I went back and watched it, and I was like, yeah, that was actually a really poor play by Hill. It wasn't a very well thrown ball, but he took a really weak effort or whatever angle. He's kind of falling away from it, but he didn't really try to go up for the ball. It allowed the Bengals defender to come in from behind and deflect it. Obviously sort of a lucky deflection as well, and the pass was intercepted, but it is one that I don't think you were just kind of throwing out there. We've talked about it. I will vouch for it that when I went back and watched it, I was like, yeah, he could have done a lot more on that play. He was kind of just letting it go incomplete, but because of that, he opened this window for an advantageous defensive play that ended up costing them their season, essentially. It put the Bengals right in field goal range almost. They barely gained any yards to kick the game winner. And then the Super Bowl a couple years ago, I mean, we've also discussed that, but I think some people probably maybe roll their eyes at that because there's this idea that the Bucs completely dominated that game. I'm completely right there with you on that, where there were so many key plays in the first half of that game where the Chiefs just played a really poor first half, didn't execute some things. That Hill play was one of the biggest ones. And then they got into the hole, and because they got into the hole and they couldn't block, it changed the entire shape of the game. But there was even stuff on the Bucs side. There was the offsides on the field goal that turned that drive into a touchdown. There was a questionable after the play personal foul, and I think Chris Jones hitting Ryan Jensen in the face mask on the defensive line. They're just kind of shoving, and they call a personal foul on a third down where the Bucs would have punted. Bucs go on to score a touchdown on that drive. We don't need to relitigate the Super Bowl from 2 years ago, but I mean, I don't think you're crazy for some of those takes, to be clear. It's very, very interesting what the Chiefs might have been thinking, because to this point, everything we've seen is that they've basically been willing to put up with anything related to Hill. And there has been a lot. There's obviously the off-field stuff. They have been willing to just act like everything is fine there. That's part of the risk, I think, for the Miami side too. And we can't just not discuss it, is like they are trading for a guy who has a checkered past as well. And I mean, not just in college. In 2019, the recordings and all these things, there's a lot of, very clear stuff that we've seen that we've all sort of just forgotten about because that's what we do. Or maybe not forgotten about, but don't mention as much. But they're trading for him. They're giving up a ton of resources to get him and then pay him a ton of money. What does this mean for Miami? Like, they already had Jalen Waddle. This is not good for Jalen Waddle. I mean, obviously, Jalen Waddle is still very good, and we talk all the time about how teams can support multiple number one receivers, that we're not like sitting here ranking the receiver on most teams. There's ways that this will be a benefit for Waddle. But Waddle last year didn't really need anyone to take the attention. He still earned a massive target rate. So for him specifically, I'm looking at it like he didn't need someone to free him up. He already showed the ability to earn targets underneath. Now I'm just concerned about the overall size of the pie and their quarterback play. And everyone knows that, Tua's not a great downfield passer, or that's the current widely accepted narrative, and very well might be the ultimate storyline of his career. Now you have these two massive speedsters. The thing we wanted from Waddle was more explosive plays, but now it seems less likely that we see him running downfield as much now that you have the game's elite downfield speedster on the roster. I mean, Miami just feels like they have a ton of sports cars and no offense, no way to. I mean, Mike McDaniel's a positive, right? He's been able to utilize players, or he comes from an offense that utilizes players in creative ways and gets them the ball in space and creates yak. Can Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle coexist? Can they both be really good in Miami? What is your initial thought about the Dolphins offense?
So you're not giving Mike Gesicki credit for being
that guy
didn't
mention him.
Ties it all together.
No, I think I just acted like he doesn't exist. I just acted like he doesn't exist. But no, I mean, if Tyreek and Waddle are some bizarro version of Debo and Ayuk, then Gesicki's some bizarro version of Kittle, I guess.
We have Gesicki available for trades in our Triflex League if you want to chime in there. No, this is kind of fun, I think. And one of the things that we saw last year from the Dolphins, and again, it'll be a different system, but Waddle able to get open quickly, get those targets underneath, and then he's got this blazing speed. So now the Dolphins have the fastest team in the NFL, right? I mean, you have Waddle and Hill out there. How do you defend it? I think it's a cool trade for them. I think it's fun, right? And Hill is going to be able to take some of those underneath targets, I think, and free up Waddle to do some deep route work as well. I think they can interchange in terms of some of the things that they do. If the Dolphins don't have the other explosive element, then maybe Waddle is trapped underneath a little bit more. We'll have to see how it plays out, but I like it for both of them. And then I think that Hill's going to continue to get some underneath targets, even with Waddle there. We know he can get behind the defenses. I think that he'll have some splash plays. Even with Tua there as the QB, one of the things that we saw and one of the reasons he was drafted so early is that in college, he had all of these first-round wide receivers, and they could get wide open, and that will make you look good as a college quarterback. You don't see that as often at the NFL level, but perhaps if you have Hill and Waddle, and then Mike Gesicki, again, not in those guys' kind of area, but for a tight end, extremely athletic, somebody else who can get open. I think that this could potentially stress defenses in a way that Tua does have some plays and some reads where guys are open enough that he can make some quick, early, accurate throws, even if he's got to get back there and release the ball, much earlier than Mahomes would have to release it in order to get it to these guys down the field. Drop back, chuck it, see what happens. What are your thoughts on this Dolphins offense? I mean, you kind of described a downside scenario for them. Do you have some optimism?
Well, you just got me really, really optimistic. I love your comment that without another, I think you're absolutely right. I think I was misthinking through that. Without another deep threat, legitimate option, that was part of the reason that it forced Waddle into this underneath range. It just didn't help the way that they could stretch the field. With Hill on the opposite side, now the safety help is a challenge, right? And so Waddle already was going to need to see some type of increase in his downfield target rate regardless. It was so extremely weird for a guy of his athleticism and speed to be such an underneath target. But if you have Tyreek Hill on the opposite side, the safety help is rolling that way. I mean, I think you're absolutely right about that. That's probably actually a net benefit to Waddle running out of the slot, an outside fade up the other sideline or up the seam or what have you. They're going to be able to attack defenses in a lot of ways. And then when you talk about them being the fastest team in the league and remembering that they also got Mostert, who's not going to be a heavy snap guy, but they got Mostert. They got Chase Edmunds even as an athletic and agile, pass catching type back. The running back they have on the field as well is going to be really interesting. I mean, these two receivers are going to suddenly make defenses obviously be in too high safeties and be really concerned about, unless they're just not afraid of Tua, but be mostly concerned about the way that they can get beat deep. And then Gesicki, to your point, one of the most athletic tight ends in the league. That's like the biggest selling point about him. Now the Mike McDaniel running game, though, as well with Raheem Mostert. Now you're talking about smaller guys on the field and the potential for him to get to the edge and have some explosive plays in the running game. Now I'm just like, well, we can see what Mike McDaniel's doing. He's trying to create an absolute track meet, and he's trying to give Tua the exact offense he had in Alabama, where every one of his skill players creates such a challenge for a defense that it's an easier decision and an easier way to play quarterback. I think you just sort of convinced me to be a lot higher on a lot of the pieces in the Miami offense, and maybe the less obvious ones like Mostert. Suddenly I'm like, wow, well, actually he's going to have some room to run. And Tua, is he going to be a good late round quarterback with all these options? I mean, I'm sure people are going to be excited about him regardless when he's adding Tyreek Hill, but or even Gesicki, to your point, this could be a pretty fun offense. I think you got me seeing the optimistic side as well.
Well, and you mentioned the running backs, and Chase Edmunds was the best running back in the NFL last year before contact. And a lot of people want to put that, mostly on the offensive line, but the explosiveness of the player really helps to get through, especially if there's space. Now it looks like both because of scheme and because of speed, they're going to be space for these guys. So these running backs now, a good fit. And I think a fun fit for the offense and for fantasy participants, especially if you're invested in the wide receivers or Gesicki, in that they're going to be explosive, and yet they probably aren't still going to be that high volume. I mean, within the scheme, perhaps that is more the case, but you could see a situation where the running backs are effective without taking them away from these stars that they have at the receiver position, if the coach wants to run the offense that way. So that part of it also fun. They can be very efficient players. Where do you have Tua now that he has these extra weapons? He has to move up from that tier that was like Carson Wentz and Matt Ryan, and not Carson Wentz. We shouldn't mention him in the name in the group with any legitimate NFL quarterbacks. But I mean, do you like him now as sort of, once Matthew Stafford is gone, for example?
Oh man, maybe. Probably not that high immediately, but I'm gonna need some time to chew on things. But part of my optimism in response to what you just said is I'm sort of hoping that this negative opinion on Tua is so crystallized in sort of the general psyche, which it seems to be. Most people seem to think that Tua is really poor, that it's so crystallized that we actually get some value. So maybe he's, QB 18 still. He moves up to QB 18 and we can draft him at QB 14 or something. I guess that's maybe in that range after Stafford's going. If he becomes like the most hyped next quarterback after you're, through ones that you feel pretty secure about their offense and their ability to score touchdowns, and the projection feels pretty solid in terms of what they're going to be able to do, which I think Stafford fits. Stafford's not going to be a huge upside quarterback, but we know the Rams are going to be good. He has weapons. He's going to throw touchdowns.
Well, he's got Allen Robinson now. So.
He's got Allen Robinson now, which we were going to talk about today, but we didn't even get a chance. If he becomes the most interesting Tua right after that group, I don't think I'm going to be like all over him, because I do think there are still concerns. We don't know necessarily how well McDaniel will even be able to implement the offense that was so successful in San Francisco. That's something I've been a little bit concerned about or thinking about, is obviously Kyle Shanahan is the one who's, everywhere he's gone, he's had really good offenses. McDaniel worked under Shanahan. How much was Shanahan? How much was McDaniel? I'm excited for McDaniel and to see what he can do. He seems really bright. I'm optimistic, but there's a lot of young coaches that I've been excited about over the last couple of years that have kind of broken my heart a little bit. Shout out Carolina. So there's, I don't want to be too high on Tua, but I could see him being interesting if he's not, viewed positively. If there's an immediate, response that this is actually just going to be Tyreek, a Ferrari, parked in a dump of a house kind of a thing, where like they can't, that meme on Twitter, which you're not even on Twitter, but they can't actually use Tyreek because of Tua's limitations. If that's what everyone believes, then I'd probably want to be in on Tua. It might be a decent time to try to buy Tua in Dynasty, but obviously his price is going to go up. It's just a question of how much does his price go up, whether there are people who are thinking this is a great sell high opportunity with his price getting a little bit of a bump. And you're like, well, I actually think his price should have been even more of a bump. That's sort of the way I'm looking at Tua, but I could actually see, as we continue to progress through this offseason, just getting more and more optimistic about the Dolphins offense and Tua. I mean, I just think I need some time to actually let that marinate.
Sure. And I think that in Dynasty, it could be tricky because the price now is going to be a lot more expensive. I mean, you can't help but have a more expensive quarterback when you have Tyreek Hill there. And for Dynasty, and really in any league, but especially there in Dynasty with the QB position, it's going to come down to if he's good or not. I mean, even with those guys, if you cannot play at the quarterback position, they will not be able to cover it up with the weapons. And so you pay a lot more now and your risk is still there. But if you look at something like best ball, I think it's very intriguing because we talk a lot about the QB window in best ball and how you need to get your two QBs there. If you pay too much or you wait too late for your QB2, which I think a lot of people focus on the paying too much and forget that if you wait too late for your second quarterback and you don't have a legitimate option there, especially if you're building a big portfolio, then all of those teams that end up without legitimate options are really hurt in terms of win rate, right? The win rate just craters. Now we have another guy that I think you might want some exposure to, and the price, while it's going to tick up, it's going to tick up into a range that you can still manage. And I think that structurally, that's kind of an interesting play because it gives you another guy there. If you're someone who wants to wait and you're really focused on making sure you get two quality options, now you've got somebody else. If it's too thin in that range right there at the edge, and you're being price conscious, and so you're waiting and waiting, but then you can get in a situation where you lose out because you wait too long. So I think having a couple extra QBs that actually will work, and you could argue maybe Matt Ryan now works for the Indianapolis Colts. I think that helps you execute that, and that's kind of a cool part of that.
Yeah.
Also for people who want to stack with their best ball teams or pair a wide receiver with a QB, one of the things there too is that being price conscious is important. And Tua offers someone where you can make that move, and the quarterback portion at least is inexpensive. And so if you get a Hill early or you get a Waddle early, and then you come back with that QB that doesn't cost you so much. Now there are going to be some people in your league who are maybe looking at that and pick him a little bit early just to stop you from executing. And I wouldn't worry too much. I think sometimes people can be overly focused on that. But there are some elements there, especially in best ball, that I think kind of make this fun from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to KC, though, because I want to get your response on what the Chiefs should do. I also want to pull in a couple comments. There's one here that says, my only question is which wide receiver KC trades for. I have to think DK is a guy. They get half of what they collected from Miami. I've seen DK Metcalf on Twitter mentioned several times. It's interesting. Seattle had a report the other day. They want to do everything they can to try to re-sign him. But the reality is that he might not want to be in Seattle anymore, when his contract is up. You like the Fuller idea, I assume. But, what would you do? If you were in Brett Veach's seat, what would you do now? You're like, what do you do now? Open slate. What do you do?
Yeah, I'd like to see him add speed. And so one of the things that was kind of weird about drafting Hardman instead of Metcalf in the first place was just that, yeah, you're getting the speed, but you could have gotten that speed with a guy who also had size, which we know from the different freak score research stuff Matt Spencer has done even recently. Obviously, the Fantasy Douche, a lot of his research on kind of how the touchdowns are related there, making sure you get those, that it's difficult to replace those touchdowns if you don't have a receiver who brings that profile to the table. And so Metcalf's somewhat interesting, but it's also interesting that they didn't feel like he was a fit in the first place. I mean, Hardman hadn't shown a lot in college. And so for them to have looked at him and said, no, we don't think he can play wide receiver, that's a little bit of a weird take in light of who they actually drafted. And so then you're wondering, did they think that this, Calvin Johnson-esque player wouldn't work with their offense? I mean, that's also kind of a weird thing to think there. The flip side of that is, and one of the things I mentioned with you in terms of how I was worried that Russell Wilson, that the trade was awesome, but the Seahawks could easily come back and ruin it, would be to give away a lot of the value that you just got. And kind of a different conversation, but now that the Seahawks are talking about Drew Lock and Geno Smith as being in this pitched battle to be their starter, you can't be, from a Seahawks perspective, super excited about that. But at least they haven't gone out and given away those picks instantly. I think with Metcalf, there's an interesting situation here where, and I always think it's inappropriate, or you want to be very conservative about speculating about what the different players are like. But you had mentioned that we have some things with Tyreek Hill. Nothing really like that, I don't think, for DK Metcalf, at least that I'm aware of, but maybe a little bit of a handful. And so if you're looking for someone who is going to go out there, execute the plays, be really easy to work with, not make mental mistakes, maybe he's not that fit. You say, well, Will Fuller is going to play 2 games. How is that a fit for anything? But it will be interesting there to give him a shot. I mean, one of the things with Will Fuller is that he brings speed, not 4.2 speed, because basically no one does, but he brings speed, also very skilled. And so that element, I think, would be something that would be great for the Chiefs, who have the speed with Hardman, but are looking for a receiver who can run some of these routes down the field, get open at various levels, and bring that speed element with them. I really want them to go back here and not give up picks for veterans. You use your money in free agency and you use your picks in the draft. You don't do both, which again is the thing that we We're very excited about this for the Dolphins, but that would be our criticism, is that you doubly paid for someone, even if they're this good. That's an issue.
It doesn't really make the trade away of Tyreek make a lot of sense if you give up a bunch of resources to acquire a DK and then you're going to be re-signing him in a couple.
Because those players are going to be worse. Individually, they're going to be worse.
Yeah. So it doesn't make any sense. I actually did not really love the trade discussion. I'm right there with you that they need to either sign free agents or draft to fix this. We agree that Will Fuller is the obvious, clear, best next step. Assume that they can't get him. Assume he's already, going to go to Cleveland or whatever. Where are you at then? Is it MVS plus 2 rookies with Juju?
Yeah, I mean, let's go out there and take, Williams and Pickens. The problem there is you're bringing a lot of injury risk on right from the get-go. Maybe you're looking at some slightly different guys. The dream scenario now is we're always wanting these receivers to be drafted where we think they should be drafted, but why not have a Burks fall at this point? Ben, what are you thinking? And I know that you like to throw it to me on some of these rookie questions. And just to get a quick shameless plug in, the volume 2 of the RotoViz Rookie Guide, including my checking all the boxes, the second portion of that article where I kind of go through all the top prospects from that perspective. But Ben, what are you hearing that is out to finish this?
That's out. You got to get it. It's a fantastic rookie guide.
What are you hearing and what are you thinking in terms of some of these guys? Garrett Wilson, I mean, he's locked in. There's no way that he falls to the Chiefs. Do you think someone like a London, a Burks? I mean, we've had some fun guys on OT, Danny Kelly, Matt Hicks, talking about some of these 4-year wide receivers, Chris Olave, someone who is interesting and fast. I mean, again, you're talking about replacing a 4.2 speed guy with, 4.22 with a 4.38. How fast are those guys on the field? We know that there are some 4-year players who bring elite speed, and yet always in the back of our mind, we know that the 4-year guys have historically, and not every one, but has historically underperformed. Do you have any particular player that you think could be in that range? I mean, Williams with the speed and what he did last season, could they possibly pass on him if he falls there? I mean, the reason he would fall would obviously be when you are trying to compete right away. And as you get into the 20s, those teams in most cases are trying to compete right away. If you're thinking we have to wait a little bit, the rookie won't be able to go through some of the offseason things. You don't know about the recovery. I mean, recoveries on a lot of these injuries are very good, but it's not seamless. It's not perfect. Again, if you move Tyreek Hill and you miss, I mean, I keep going back to one of the things with moving a Tyreek Hill. It's almost like when you passed on Jonathan Taylor. I mean, no one's going to forget that you passed on Jonathan Taylor. No one's going to forget that, at least I don't.
Shawn definitely will not.
No one's going to forget that you traded Tyreek Hill. I mean, there's pressure here on the Chiefs GM now.
Yeah. To your questions about where the rookies go, I was talking to Davis Mack the other day, I guess last week, and I think he's really hoping that Treylon Burks is available to the Cowboys at like 22 or wherever they're at, 23. But the Packers now being at 20, I mean, I don't see like a guy like that tier of receiver getting past the Packers at 20. There's another really interesting comment that I wanted to call up, and it's a great time to call it up, from Ricky. It says, so aren't we just smashing rookies at this point? We feel like we feel great about at least 2 first-round receivers to go to places like Watson, Mahomes, Rodgers, certainly, Green Bay, and now Kansas City, and obviously in Cleveland. Like, we're talking about some really good quarterbacks not having their wide receiver position settled. So now this class that is really intriguing. We don't really care that much about landing spot, but it's certainly not a bad thing to go play with a really high-level quarterback, to go be Patrick Mahomes' new first-round wide receiver after they traded Tyreek Hill. That's obviously something that's going to be intriguing. If the receiver also has a great profile and everything else, I mean, you're just excited as all heck. And same with Rodgers without Adams. And I think that's absolutely true. If you're doing best balls between now and the NFL draft, I think you need to be hammering the rookie wide receivers. Get as much exposure as you can. The ones that land in those spots are going to skyrocket in price. You're going to have, you should already be hammering the rookie receivers is the point. But I do think this is a smart thought to be on them even more. But to your question about like who falls to Kansas City, that's also a really relevant part of that discussion. Is there's a lot of teams now that are interested in these receivers. And we've seen some, the bad teams still need receivers. And we've seen some projected in the first 15 picks, obviously, to some of the weaker teams. I don't know, like the Bears, right? The Bears are an option, or the Colts or whoever. And Colts aren't necessarily a weaker team, and I don't think they're picking in the top 15. But they're another team that isn't immediately being discussed. It certainly could use another receiver. It's like suddenly I'm like, I think we're going to have 6 receivers in the first round. I think we're going to have the way that the free agent market at wide receiver has exploded, and now you can get these cost controlled wide receivers in the draft. GMs are not stupid. A lot of them, they don't want to do what the Jaguars did and be paying Zay Jones $30 million or whatever they decided to pay him. I think the wide receiver market is going to be crazy. This is a deep wide receiver class. One of the things we've talked a lot about is in that deeper range. You mentioned Williams and Pickens, and even going into Ross. They have some injury concerns, but there's elite upside potential, at least in their profile. There are these interesting little elements in their profile. Like to be able to potentially lock that in. And the Chiefs are the perfect fit for a guy like Williams coming off an ACL where, they're going to probably need to gel with a new offense regardless, but they do have Patrick Mahomes. I don't think, this division is really good. The lack of Hill might suddenly make them not the clear favorite in the division anymore. But I don't think they're going to be in like real risk of having like a 500 season as they wait for Williams to get healthy enough, maybe a mid-season, to start to make an impact. I think they're probably still going to be on track for a playoff spot. Maybe not their traditional, competing for the number 1 overall spot in the AFC. But that's probably going to be the case regardless. They're going to need to gel a little bit in the first half of next year regardless. So for them, a rookie who needs to rehab a little bit, I don't know. I guess it just makes sense in my head where they're probably going to have their stumbles anyway early on, but also not really serious ones because they're the Chiefs, because they have Patrick Mahomes. So you could kind of take that on and let him come back when he's ready, and then have this additional piece that you get to throw in once you stabilize everything else with Juju and Fuller or whoever else is there. Once you start to get things figured out, now you can throw Jameson Williams in when he's healthy enough. I think he's a perfect fit for Kansas City, and from a stylistic perspective as well, and the things that he can do. But yeah, it seems to me like we're going to get a lot of receivers. So I don't know about like a Treylon Burks or like the actual top names getting back to the Chiefs unless they decide to trade up.
And one of the things too is I hope that they don't trade up. That's what we mentioned with the Seahawks, is just, have the discipline to wait it out. You made the right move in not overcommitting to Hill, or at least you gambled that being patient, having this sort of humility-based approach to, we're going to create as many paths as possible. Wait it out now. Don't, give away that value to move up for a guy who might have fallen to you or may not be the right guy. And so I'm hoping that the thing that you mentioned there, people hammering on best ball, it also goes back to our dynasty discussions that we've been having, where the 2022 draft just continues to get more interesting from the perspective of what these players are going to actually be worth and what you'll be able to trade them for, what you'll be able to use them for immediately. If you've been moving 2022s for 2023s, you may not have gotten what you should, because you should be getting a 2023 first plus. It's not an equal thing. I think because the class has been perceived to be so much stronger, people are not getting the discount for the time involved. But you think about even someone like an Elijah Moore, who was a second-round pick last year, played for the Jets, is in this offense where you have Zach Wilson. And because he had a couple of extremely impressive games, and because he was actually an excellent prospect, he's now someone who is worth a ton in all formats. We had a show about how his redraft ADP and best ball ADP, how that kind of informs what you can understand or know about his dynasty value. You think about a guy like that, and you think about how many different receivers are going to have similar elements to them this year and are going to be with an Aaron Rodgers or a Patrick Mahomes instead of a Zach Wilson. Think about the massive difference that makes. Now, Jamar Chase, a generational prospect, and like Jonathan Taylor, those two guys, true generational prospects who are worthy of that term. And yet one of the things that can't help but to have played a valuable role in his just magical rookie season is that he got to play with Joe Burrow, who, despite a little bit of a slow start because he's coming back from that serious injury, Joe Burrow is an excellent NFL quarterback. and leads them obviously there to the Super Bowl. You want to have guys with those players. We're set up for some of these receivers to end in excellent situations. And it'll be interesting because there's a possibility that the situation is so good and the prospects so solid that you might even see those guys who right now look like the 107, the 108, they press up into the 103, 104, which maybe then you can say, well, that's a risk. Perhaps they're a little bit overvalued. But the flip side of that is that pushes guys down who we feel great about. And so however way it works out, you're going to have some very intriguing options. And then when you add the Superflex element, the entire first round is going to be worth a lot this season. Once we know which quarterbacks are actually worth those first round picks. That was one of the things that was interesting in the rookie guide, was trying to balance our evaluation of the quarterbacks with the fantasy upside that they have because of the rushing ability for some of them and not as much for others. And then what we're hearing from the reality community, both the scuttlebutt from actual NFL teams and then the draftniks who know a lot about what the perception is kind of overall. Is a Howell going to go in the first round? Is a Ritter going to go in the first round? Who's falling? Who's rising? What situations are actually even still open with all the movement that we've had? And would a team, are the Steelers or the Seahawks or some of those teams really going to go with these options that they have in place? And one of the reasons that you put those options in place is to be a little bit more unpredictable and give yourself a little bit of leverage and not telegraph your intentions. But there are some interesting risks there as well that they might actually go with some of those things. So then from that perspective, we have a lot of 2022 first. We're investing in this idea. It's going to be good, but are you feeling good about this?
Yeah. We were sort of hoping in some of our spots that the QB class would get enough buzz that they might go in the top 5 picks so we could start to get some of the non-QBs pushed down a little bit, or I don't know, we might wind up interested in some of the QBs as well. But I think you're right that we're gonna see some. After Malik Willis's pro day yesterday, I definitely started to see some tweets that were talking about him at 101. So I think it's clear because there's a lot of people talking about him being the number 2 overall pick, and if he's the number 2 overall pick, then I saw some people talk about him being the 101 in Superflex rookie drafts. Which, if that's the case, I'm not going to necessarily knock that right away. I haven't done a ton of research on Malik Willis, but it is what we expected. What you said in January when everyone was saying that none of these QBs are going to even go in the first 6 or 10 picks of Superflexes, you're like, they always rise. Someone always rises. There's enough names here, and it looks like maybe it's Malik Willis right now. But him going in the top 5 in a Superflex draft and potentially the second or third of that group, some of the other names you just mentioned, Pickett, Howell, Ritter, whoever it is, going in the first round as well, suddenly you're pushing back some really good names to like 108, 109. So yeah, that's exciting, obviously. I want to talk a little bit about real football, though. I want to know where you think the Chiefs are right now. Part of what I want to talk to you about was this idea that maybe Russell Wilson is an interesting dynasty buy right now. It's because I think it's sort of similar to the Tua point, like his value rose, but people are still down on him because of last year. And you're someone who I think maybe fits in that, where you've said that you don't know that, maybe sort of similar to what I was saying, just that maybe his best days are behind him. And going forward, we will see them win, but he maybe won't be incredible. I think he has quite a bit of upside in that offense still. I'm still going to be a little higher than you on that. I think it is funny that we did the show last week and I was sort of tilting the Seahawks trade and you were trying to convince me that that was somehow a positive and just driving me nuts. And so I wanted to do this live to get you tilting Kansas City's team falling apart. And you have somehow, in your eternal optimism, and for anyone who doesn't know Shawn, optimistic about absolutely anything, you have managed to explain how not only have the Chiefs gotten better in this lose-lose trade, but also Miami's offense has gotten so much better and it will be super fun. It's just amazing for everyone. It's all coming up roses, especially for Kansas City. I think that's what I've heard from you so far in this hour. But what I want to know is where do you think Kansas City fits in relation to the Chargers, who did exactly what we talked about in January when we were saying they're a really interesting Super Bowl futures bet because of the cap space they still had, because of Justin Herbert's contract and the pieces they already had in place. They went out and got J.C. Jackson. They made all these other moves that they now have a really good roster. The Broncos also go out and get Russell Wilson. The Raiders go and get Devante Adams. This is an incredible division now in terms of talent. Hill leaving is like the first thing we have seen all offseason that hasn't suggested that maybe all of the Pro Bowl would come out of the AFC West. Where do the Chiefs fit in now in the divisional hierarchy in terms of real football expectations?
I mean, they've got Patrick Mahomes. You've got the best player in the NFL by a good margin. So they're number one. But we'll see what they do to execute here. One of the things that we've talked about and I think is encouraging is that for a while there, once they discovered how good Mahomes was, they started to act as though they had a Tom Brady or an Aaron Rodgers at 38 or 41, and you're trying to build this team around him to win the next couple of Super Bowls, as opposed to thinking that they have Tom Brady, at 22, 23, 24, and you're going to win 7 or 8 Super Bowls. And it's almost now where they've flipped this switch and they're actually planning to build a deep, dominant team that gets there every year and actually allow Mahomes to compete with Brady for all of these things. So the fact that I'm putting him in that kind of conversation and suggesting that he could make a run at these stats that Brady has that are astronomical and impossible really even to believe are true would suggest I'm optimistic. I am excited to see the next step, right? Because one of the things that we loved about what the Bengals did last year is that they had T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, and they went out and got Jamar Chase. And we say, the NFL is a passing league. You need to be able to beat teams through the air, and you need to have as much firepower as possible. Don't stop just because you get good. Try to put together something that's all-time great. It seems like the Chiefs are going the exact opposite direction, but there are a lot of ways that they can move off of this and be deeper and better at wide receiver in 2022. I hope they do that. The other side of it is, just the AFC West is going to be difficult, and you're going to have to be very, very good. That's the thing that all of these teams are now looking at, right? If you're the Broncos, you have to make a move for Russell Wilson. If you're the Raiders, I think this is a super cool move for Devante Adams. Derek Carr, underappreciated quarterback. The Raiders are going to be very, very good. Obviously, Justin Herbert, if you're talking about the best quarterbacks in the NFL, maybe not that far behind. We're a year or two away from looking at Herbert as potentially an all-time great also. Maybe not quite to the level of Mahomes, but someone who just is a transcendent talent. And those guys at the QB position, they put you in the mix to win every year.
It will, for a long time, bother me that we didn't get to see Herbert in the playoffs this year. It was Burrow's year, and it was great to see him elevate. But what Justin Herbert did in that Week 17 game, the number of fourth down conversions, they were way behind. He didn't play a perfect game, I think, in the first half. I can't recall, but I remember going back and counting. I think they had like 6 fourth down conversions, and a couple of them were like 4th and 25. Remember, there was like the touchdown that he extended the play and just threw a seed in there to Mike Williams, I think. That was one of the best fourth quarters, if not the best fourth quarter a quarterback played all year, with the playoffs on the line. All do or die plays, do or die play after do or die play. And even throwing out the gravity of the situation where if you don't convert any of those, your season's over. It was still just one of the best quarterbacks or quarters a quarterback played all year. He was so good in that game that I cannot wait to see him in playoff games and everything. The way he rose to the occasion. Some quarterbacks just have that ability, right? And it was so, God, I wish the Raiders would have just freaking kneeled so we could have got the Chargers in the playoffs.
That would have been super fun. The thing you mentioned about Wilson, and the thing here, we were excited about Carr. Didn't necessarily expect, obviously, that he'd ever get to play with Devante Adams. Getting a lot of Carr offers now. I think that, you want to pick up Carr if you can. If there's anybody out there who's willing to move him to you, Wilson and Carr exciting, not only because of what they have now, but the AFC West has got to be shootout city, right? You don't want to be the team that kind of goes in the opposite direction of, say, what the Buffalo Bills have demonstrated and tries to figure out Seahawks style, like, how can we control the ball and win against Herbert and Wilson and Carr? We're not going to see any of the teams go that route, are we?
I don't think so. It would be disastrous. And that's a great point. It will be shootout city, and something that we talk about and a lot of people talk about, you getting in these big best ball contests. You want to look at the late season matchups. You want to try to target situations where the games could explode. One of the ones that everyone was targeting last year was the Bengals and Chiefs as a potential massive shootout. And we did end up seeing the Bengals explode, especially Jamar Chase explode in that game, obviously. So great point there to target maybe these AFC West matchups down the stretch. The other thing I was just thinking that we haven't hit on yet is Devante Adams versus Tyreek Hill, both in new situations, both guys that are very, very good, but also somewhat dependent on their actual quarterback play. I'm having a hard time in my head saying who I'm downgrading more or who I value higher or, how I'm responding. Do you have an immediate lean on Adams versus Hill in either? I mean, they're relatively close in age. I think Hill's a little younger, but in either season long or dynasty?
Well, I think that sometimes Adams gets overlooked as an athlete, which can be a little bit of an issue. He's got explosive lateral agility. He's got great leaping ability. He doesn't have 4.2 speed, but those things really help your quarterback out on some of these off-target throws, or if you're covered, but then you're going to be thrown to as a covered player and you're going to go make the play, right? And so Carr is going to be a significant downgrade from Aaron Rodgers, but still a good quarterback. People love to talk about, and Devante Adams has loved to talk about the fact that he loved playing with Derek Carr, thinks that he's very, very good. I think that element of it will be fun to watch. We've seen McDaniel have some explosive offenses. I think there's a little bit of me that worries that he was actually a problem with the Patriots over the last several years and didn't unlock some of their guys the way I would have liked to have seen. But here's someone who has been involved in offenses, have scored a lot of points. I think that in order for them to be competitive, they'll have to go out there and score a lot of points. You have Adams, you have Waller, you have Hunter Renfrow underneath. And those guys, you have the ability now to take defenses apart. And Adams is going to maybe have a little bit more target competition than he had with the Packers. At the same time, teams will actually have to worry about his teammates a little bit more than perhaps they had to with the Packers, which will help him. So I think he's going to be able to get open at will. I still have him as a slightly better reality player. They're just very different and they do different things well. They're both awesome. I think there are more questions because we don't know about Tua, and we probably also are a little bit more open-ended in terms of how we see the Dolphins offense, the different scenarios that could play out there, both in terms of competency and in terms of schematically what they decide to do, what their plays are, what their mentality is. We went over some of those earlier in the show, and there's reason for optimism, but the very wide range of things that could potentially happen there. I guess I would give Devante Adams and the Raiders a pretty high floor in addition to a ceiling that maybe isn't quite as reduced as some people are thinking. What's your sense? You've probably got a better feel for what the community actually thinks in terms of Adams there with the Raiders.
I think my immediate response, my immediate response on both was quite a bit of pessimism about losing the quarterback that I think was, while I think the players are both fantastic, I think the quarterback was also a part of the equation of their success. Unquestionably. And we talked on the show, I think, about basically everything Adams and Rodgers did being like almost impossible to replicate in terms of like you couldn't use Adams more effectively than the Packers have. So there has to be just down from there. There's no way to do it better. But and then sort of similar for Hill, although Hill maybe hasn't been used as effectively as possible the last couple of years because of the ways that they've been faced, but still, having Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback is a huge boost to you getting the most out of what you could potentially get out of your skill in an average situation. And Miami's probably not the best situation for that in turn. And yet, I think, I don't know. One of my immediate responses is that obviously Adams has Carr now and he's played with Carr and there's some familiarity there. And so maybe that's better than the Hill thing. I think Hill's traits are maybe perhaps more just special. I think I'm more optimistic that McDaniel can scheme him to space like a Debo. I mean, like we've talked a lot this offseason about who's the next Debo and this and that. Well, Tyreek Hill is a guy that could, like, we've joked a lot that nobody is the next Debo, but Tyreek Hill is a guy that can actually provide some of the wiggle and explosiveness and things that Debo provides. If you want to talk about somebody who could be used similarly and actually create some of the explosive plays and actually do some of the things that make Debo great, Tyreek Hill is a guy that might actually be able to, to provide that to an offense. And so if he winds up reaping those benefits that we had talked about, potentially Waddle being used in those ways. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I still think Hill from just so much of what Adams and Rodgers did was timing and everything, and Hill from a sheer athleticism standpoint might be able to continue to create with sort of that returner-like ability with the ball in his hands, continue to create some of these big plays, even if he doesn't have this great downfield quarterback. I don't know. It's a tough question. I mean, they're very similar situations in the ways that they've lost their value. That's one we'll have a lot of time to answer. Shawn, we're over an hour. I think probably we should wrap up pretty soon. For anyone who's still watching, please like and subscribe. We're trying to get the subscribers up on the RotoViz channel. Do everyone over at RotoViz a big solid. Shawn, is there anything else that we haven't hit on that we definitely need to, or I should have grilled you about that you were afraid that I was going to ask about with the Chiefs that the people need to hear before we go?
Well, what's your bold prediction for how this all plays out? You know that I'm going to come up with a positive spin. Yeah. Are you telling me now Chiefs 4th place in the AFC West? What's their outlook?
I'm not going there. I will say that the Chiefs don't win the division this year. That'll be, I mean, I don't know how bold that is, but I'll say they don't win the division. I'll say that in the first half of the year, they struggle. And that either the Chargers, who I think will now win the division, or potentially the Broncos win the division. I think ultimately Kansas City is going to be back on top in like 2024 and beyond. But I do think there will be some adjustment necessary. They've had their adjustment periods in regular seasons in the past. I think they're going to be good. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think they're going to be firing on all cylinders immediately. And maybe I'm going to look really bad, because that was sort of like what we thought in Mahomes' first MVP season was like, yeah, he could be really good and this offense could be really good, but they're probably not going to fire on all cylinders right away. And then he came out and went 5,050. I mean, this could also be a scenario where they come out and just torch. But I do think, number one, I don't think they're going to fill out the rest of their receiver core as efficiently as we're thinking, where they actually get Fuller and they get the right rookie receivers. It just never happens that way. But I do think they're going to have some adjustment periods in the first half of the year, kind of fall a couple games behind, ultimately not win the division and get into the playoffs as a wild card. It's not really that bold, but that'll be my opinion.
Well, and that kind of did spur one other little thought for me, which is that what's the situation now for Travis Kelce? Is he going to break every tight end record next year with, having Patrick Mahomes and these guys to just enough talent to force the defense to play honest? Or is he now going to get the Tony Gonzalez treatment? Not that Tony Gonzalez couldn't get through a lot of that. We know what Tony Gonzalez did, but is he going to get the Tony Gonzalez treatment and we have Mark Andrews and TJ Hawkinson and Albert O finish ahead of him?
Wow. I want to hear, number one, your bold prediction and also your answer to that, because I can see both arguments there. I've been concerned about Kelce's age for a couple of years. He's continued to perform very well. So, I mean, I certainly am not just jumping in and saying he's gonna break every tight end record. At the same time, he's continued to perform very well. He's still playing at the top of his game, and I don't think that's impossible for the reasons you just said. Without Tyreek Hill there, it might make Travis Kelce be that much more dependent, like Mahomes more dependent on him in the early part of the season when I was talking about the other stuff gelling. He might be having to go to Kelce so much, and I think they would still be pretty successful, pretty efficient, even in additional, defensive attention situations like you were referencing with Gonzalez. But I want to know your take on both of those. You put them on me, but what are you thinking?
I think he'll be close. I don't think he's going to get the absolute top, but I think it's going to be close. I'm going to say, I know that you're right and that they're not going to execute. As you mentioned, it just never works out that way. But I'm going to say they add enough talent that there are some other things defenses have to adjust for. And then we talk about the age for players and sort of the age cliffs and the reasons to be concerned, or at least price conscious, both in terms of dynasty trades, where you're looking at some of these players in redraft. But when you're talking about guys who perform well into their 30s, you're looking for superstars. You're looking for people who are not showing any signs of decline, and you're looking for people who are healthy. And so the players who have managed to defy the odds are players who fit what Kelce has been doing, right? And so we love the way that he's playing. I mean, you look at last year's playoffs, some of the key catches, some of the run after the catch types of plays. He's just so good. And I think with that, and with Patrick Mahomes, it is going to work out. There'll be situations, especially probably down by the goal line, where he's got multiple guys and they're just saying, let anybody else score. We don't think that Mecole Hardman can run a pattern into the end zone. Maybe a manufactured touch scores for him, but they'll be looking at some of those types of things. So there is risk, I think, especially in terms of his touchdown total. The yardage numbers, I think, are going to be insane. But in terms of finishing number one, look out for Russell Wilson and your guy, Alberto, right?
Oh, Alberto's going to be the overall top tight end? Is that what Shawn loves? If you get Shawn past an hour 10, he loves to sneak in these takes that are just really hot. This is why you always got to listen till the end of Stealing Bananas. So Alberto's tight end 1 overall is what I just heard.
Look out for him. You don't want to be on the other end of that.
So what about the Chiefs? Your optimistic, bold prediction. They win the Super Bowl this year. Is that it? I mean, is it that boring?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that you're right back there in this Final Four. We'll put Herbert in the Final Four with them this year and have Burrow, have Allen. Let's say back-to-back overtime victories. The Chiefs win the coin toss, go down and score in both of them, just because that makes everyone happy, right? And then obviously they're going to come back and get revenge, defeat Tom Brady and the Buccaneers in the Super Bowl.
There it is. Chiefs over the Bucs, Super Bowl champions without Tyreek Hill. This was a super fun live Stealing Bananas. We're going to have to do more of this. Again, subscribe on YouTube. Really helps out the channel. But this was super fun, Shawn. We'll have to do more of these. We literally decided this less than a half an hour before we went to it. I was like, I just want to go live with you right now, because I didn't know if we'd have the trade details yet either. And I was like, well, everything we talk about might be stale by the afternoon anyway. If the trade details come out way different than the angles we went with, we got the trade details right before we went live, but we just decided, hey, we're going to go live. We're going to do it. We're going to do it live. And I had a blast. This was a lot of fun.
Well, Ben, thanks so much for recommending this and helping to facilitate it, supporting the channel. For anyone who is not subscribed to Stealing Signals, you missed a great article yesterday from Ben. He'll have some more of those for you shortly, and we'll talk about some more of that on our episodes of Stealing Bananas that will be coming to you over the next couple of weeks. But obviously, we had to do a special episode today. I'm Shawn Siegele. With me, as always, is Ben Gretch, whom you can follow at @YardsPerGretch. Subscribe to Stealing Signals. If you want to join us at RotoViz, we would love to have you there as well. We had so much content on free agency. We've got some cool strategy pieces to help you win. In best ball, we have Dynasty covered with the second episode of the rookie guide, I should say second volume of the rookie guide there. If you wanted 10% discount to RotoViz, use the coupon code RVRadio2022 at checkout. Thanks to everyone who is listening to the pod. Subscribe to the feed to get these as soon as they come out. We didn't record last night. I'm going to say that's because we knew we were going to have news we had to cover this morning. Subscribe to the feed. Leave us a rating and review if you can. We appreciate you guys so much. Thanks to everyone who joined us live. We'll talk to you guys soon.